friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Lauren, you may also call me Lo, and today I'm bringing you my May wrap-up. So thank you so much for being here. I hope you're doing well. If you're new to my channel, please consider liking this video and subscribing. I put out one bookish video every Sunday, sometimes more often if I can pull it off. So in May, I read a total of 10 books and 3,648 pages. Of those pages, 1,951 pages were from listening to audiobooks, and 1,697 pages were from physically reading. The average book length was 365 pages. So I usually try to keep those page numbers sort of even between physical books and audiobooks. I read a lot more audiobook pages this month than normal, and that's mostly because I was reading longer physical books. You'll see. And also because one physical book kind of slowed me down in the middle of the month, so I was reading audiobooks a lot faster while I was reading that particular physical book. Of the 10 books, 4 were YA and 6 were adult. And in terms of genre, I read 2 romances, 2 contemporaries, 2 fantasies, and then I read 1 horror, 1 thriller, and 1 historical fiction. When it comes to ratings, I rated 1 book 2 stars, 3 books 3 stars, 5 books 4 stars, and 1 book 5 stars for an average of 3.6 stars. With all of those stats out of the way, let's talk about the books that I read in May. The first book that I read in May was Call It What You Want by Bridget Kemmerer. This is a YA contemporary, and I'm really glad I read this book because I was starting to think that I didn't really like YA contemporaries, but I ended up really enjoying this one. And this book kind of made me realize that I like YA contemporaries if they have kind of heavier topics intermingled into the story. So this book follows 2 teenagers, Rob and Megan, and both have been kind of ostracized at their high school for different reasons. So Rob's father embezzled money from a lot of people in the town that they're living in, and when he was caught, he attempted suicide, and now he's pretty significantly disabled, and Rob and his mother have to kind of take care of him while they're managing getting sued by all of the people that his father embezzled money from. So they're not financially doing very well. And all of the people at Rob's school kind of hate him because he's associated with his father and having like screwed over all of these families. Megan, on the other hand, is kind of a high achiever at the high school, and she was recently caught cheating on the SATs, which not only negated her score, but negated everyone else who was taking the SAT in that room's score. Which obviously made all of those kids dislike Megan. In addition to that, Megan is kind of struggling with some like family issues, and her older sister, who's a freshman in college, has just returned from college kind of unexpectedly, and she is pregnant, and she has asked Megan to keep this a secret from her parents. So both of these characters are going through a lot, and they are paired up for this calculus project, and this kind of unexpected friendship blossoms between Megan and Rob. This book I definitely liked more than I expected to like it. I think this book does a really good job of kind of exploring the question of what is kind of that gray area between right and wrong. Is it possible to do a bad thing for a good reason? And that kind of thing. I found the kind of friendship between Megan and Rob to be very realistic and very believable. There were really like compelling, amazing side characters in this book, and I thought it was great. It made me emotional. It was wonderful. So if you haven't checked this one out, I definitely would recommend it, and I ended up giving this one 4 stars. The next book I read in May was an ARC that came out on May 24th, and that was You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty by Akike Emezi. You may know that I've read one Akike Emezi book in the past, and that was Pet. I read that in February, and I really enjoyed it. And it was really interesting to read this second book because it's such a deviation from that book. So Pet is a kind of YA fantasy, or like magical realism, I think is more accurate. And You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty is an adult romance. And while the books are very different, I enjoyed them both. So I think Akike Emezi is a kind of versatile author, I'm learning. So You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty is about a woman kind of in her late 20s named Faye. And Faye is being kind of pushed back into the dating world by her best friend 5 years after her husband died in a car accident. So Faye is at this party on a rooftop and she meets this man, and her life kind of changes unexpectedly, and she finds herself on this unnamed Caribbean island with her sights set on the one person who is truly off limits. This book, I didn't really know what to expect from this book, but this book is quite taboo, actually, and I can't really explain why because I don't want to spoil the book, but it is quite taboo, and I was quite, like, conflicted reading it. Like, I enjoyed the story, and I was very, like, edge of my seat, what's going to happen next, like, turning the pages super quickly, and I read this very, very fast. And was just like compelled by the story, but I also was slightly off-put by what was happening in the book and slightly like conflicted by what was happening in the book. So it was very interesting. At the end of the day, I did really enjoy this book, and I ended up giving it 4 stars. I would highly recommend it, but you should be prepared for kind of a taboo relationship. And I don't know. I think some people might be like really off-put by this story. I don't really know. But I enjoyed it and I gave it 4 stars. The next book I read was Ophelia After All by Raquel Marie. This book is a very, very hyped YA contemporary and also a new release. This book follows Ophelia, who is a senior in high school, and she is kind of navigating the end of high school, prom, intergroup kind of drama, and also discovering her queerness. I want to preface my review of this book with, I think this is a book that has the potential to make teenagers who are questioning their sexuality or questioning their identity feel very seen. And I think that that is where the strength of this book lies. However, I did not particularly enjoy reading this book. This book is very, very heavily focused on prom and gearing up for prom and intergroup drama surrounding who is going to prom with who. And if I'm giving an honest summary of this book, I think it's like 80% that and about 20% Ophelia discovering herself and kind of reconciling this new identity that she's discovering with the one that she's cultivated her entire life. That part of the story was what was interesting to me, and I had a really hard time caring about the prom drama, which unfortunately took up the vast majority of this book. I also found the characters to be pretty flat. They all had like one characteristic that like was their personality but wasn't actually a personality trait. So for example, Ophelia really enjoys growing roses, and that is her personality. That is the vast majority of her personality. She wears flower prints, that's mentioned a lot of times. There's a character in this book named Lindsay whose personality is that she's really pretty and all of the boys really like her. Agnes, Ophelia's best friend, wants to be a fashion designer, and that is her entire personality. So the characters weren't as fleshed out as they could have been, but despite that, I still really liked them. But the plot of the story surrounding prom just didn't do a lot for me. So with all that said, I did end up giving this book 3 stars. Again, I think its true strength lies in the fact that it can make a lot of young people, I think, feel very seen. And for that reason, I'm really glad that this book exists. I don't think it really transcends age categories the way that some YA books do. I really would only recommend this book to a younger audience. But that's just my opinion. I know a lot of people that I follow on BookTube and follow on Goodreads have really enjoyed it, and I think that they are older, so it could just be a me thing. I don't know. The next book I read was Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. This is my second Riley Sager book. The first one I read was Lock Every Door, and I read that several years ago and gave it 3 stars, I want to say. But I had a lot of hope for Home Before Dark because it's a horror book and it's also got kind of the haunted house trope, which I really enjoy, and the book within a book trope, which historically I really enjoy. This book follows a woman named Maggie Holt, who is the daughter of a famous author who wrote a book about how his family lived in this haunted house, a nonfiction book about how his family lived in this haunted house, and kind of all of the things that happened to them there. And that book became very, very famous. And his family became very famous because of the book. Maggie has lived her whole life kind of in the shadow of this book. She can't really meet anyone without them mentioning the book, without them mentioning kind of her story within the book. And she believes that the book is completely made up. And she just kind of resents this book and her father. So at the beginning of the book, her father has just passed away, and she learns that she has inherited this house, this haunted house that she didn't know her family still owned. And she decides to go to the house and kind of fix it up and sell it. So the book alternates between Maggie's perspective and the chapters of her father's book. This book, the first probably 4 to 5 chapters, I was really enjoying it, both perspectives, but I slowly kind of stopped caring about Maggie's perspective. I found her to be quite irritating as a main character to read from, and I thought her father's story was much more compelling. And then about halfway through the book, I stopped caring about both perspectives, and I just was kind of bored, which I really think is quite remarkable for a book about haunted houses. It seemed like this book was trying to be very suspenseful, but for some reason it just lost me, and I really had to push through this one, unfortunately. I didn't like the ending, and I can't really give this one a 3-star based on my lack of enjoyment for it. So I ended up settling on a 2.5 star for this one. I definitely was quite disappointed by it. And I don't know how I could have become bored reading about a haunted house, but I did. So there you go. The next book I read was Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi. This is a beloved YA fantasy book. And it's been on my radar and list of things to read for the longest time, so I'm so glad I finally knocked it off my list. I buddy read this with Nina. I'll link her channel down below. This book follows our main character, Zelly, along with a couple of other perspectives. And Zelly is a teenage girl, but when she was a child, her mother was killed on the orders of a new king, who was dead set on kind of eradicating magic, and he did so successfully by killing everybody in their kingdom who was wielding magic. So Zelly, whose mother was wielding magic, was killed, and magic that night was eradicated completely. So Zelly has kind of grown up without her mother, and her people are just kind of devastated by the loss of magic in this world. And Zelly one day is kind of given the opportunity to bring magic back. And she does so with the help of a kind of rogue princess. And to do it, they both have to kind of dodge and outwit the crown prince, who is after them and is dead set on making sure that magic never comes back. This book, plot-wise, world-wise, I really enjoyed. However, I found Zelly to be quite annoying. I found her to be quite immature, and I expected there to be like a significant growth arc for Zelly, and there wasn't really one, which was disappointing. However, there were a lot of other characters in this book that I really did enjoy. Another thing that kind of irritated me about this book was that it seemed like the author felt like she had to pair up all of the characters into couples. And while one of the couples felt natural to me, the other one felt extremely forced and was kind of like hard to read about because I didn't buy it. I didn't believe that this chemistry was there, or that any chemistry was there, really. So that didn't work so well for me. But again, plot-wise, world-wise, I thought that this was a very rich book, and I do want to read the sequel, so I did buy it, and I hope to read it soon. I did end up giving this one 3.5 stars. The next book I read was Beach Read by Emily Henry. This is a very hyped adult romance book. And I historically have not read very much romance, but I read 2 this month, which is kind of wild for me, and I enjoy both of them, so maybe I do like romance. This book follows January Andrews, who is a romance writer. And January has kind of based her perception of like the perfect relationship on her parents' perfect relationship. But her father passes away unexpectedly, and she finds out that he has a beach house that he lived in part-time with his mistress that he's had for a very, very long time. And her whole perception of the perfect relationship is completely flipped on its head. And she's starting to have significant writer's block associated with the fact that she feels like she no longer understands what the perfect relationship is. And again, she's a romance writer. So she decides to go and live at the beach house, which she has inherited, and the mistress has vacated, while she writes her next book. And she's kind of under pressure to write this book because she has to meet a deadline with her publisher. So January starts writing this book at the house, and she quickly realizes that her college kind of rival is living in the house next door. And Gus, the rival, is a literary fiction writer. And the two kind of begin to talk, and the two discover that they are experiencing writer's block, and they decide to switch genres. So January has to write a literary fiction book, and Gus has to write a romance book. And at the same time, the two start spending a lot of time together because January is kind of teaching Gus about the merits of her genre, while Gus is doing the same for January. This is an enemies to lovers book, and I was again really surprised by how much I liked this book. I think Emily Henry's writing really worked for me. I found her kind of settings and her descriptions of things very easy to imagine in my head. I found her atmosphere really compelling, and I thought that these characters were just really well developed, so I enjoyed it a lot. January was a character that I really related to in a lot of ways, not only because her story resonated with me, but I also thought that her personality and her thought patterns were very similar to mine, so I ended up really enjoying this, and I gave it 4 stars. The next book I read in May was my favorite book of the month, the 5 out of 5 star read for me, and that was Pachinko by Min-Jin Lee. This is a historical fiction book that follows a Korean family through multiple generations, starting in the early 1900s. And while this book follows many characters throughout many generations, it really kicks off with Sunja, who becomes pregnant unexpectedly and out of wedlock and threatens to shame her family. So she and her mother run this boarding house in Korea, and one day this young man with tuberculosis shows up, and the two of them kind of nurse him back to health. And when he becomes healthy enough, he kind of learns about Sunja's predicament and decides to marry her and help her raise this child in order to kind of relieve her family's potential shame and kind of as a thank you for having saved his life. So he brings Sunja to Japan, where he lives with his brother and his sister-in-law, and that kind of launches this saga of this Korean family living in Japan, experiencing significant discrimination and kind of struggling to survive. And we follow generations of this family kind of up to present day. This book is an absolute masterpiece. I think it's just a work of genius, honestly. You become very, very attached to all of the characters in this book. It's a heartbreaking story. It's also a very hopeful story. It made me cry. And I enjoyed every little bit of it. It's kind of multiple stories in one book just because you are following all of these characters in different time periods, experiencing different things, but you just become very, very invested in this family because members of it have been significant the whole way through. I don't know what else to say about this book. It's beautiful. The writing style is amazing. It's just very compelling. Obviously, I loved it. It was a 5-star read for me. If you take anything from this video, I would definitely not sleep on this book. It's rather long, but I read it pretty quickly. I definitely think that this is a book that I will be thinking about and probably revisiting at some point in my life. Yeah. It was phenomenal. The next book I finished in May was Ace of Spades by Farida Abike Iyamide. This book is a YA thriller. Again, very, very hyped book, and I enjoyed this one. So this book is often described as a mix between kind of Gossip Girl and Get Out, and I think that's a very apt description. Probably will be better than how I'm going to explain it, but this book follows two teenagers, Chiamaka and Devon. And they are the only two Black kids at this very elite private high school. And the two of them have pretty amazing prospects for their future. Devon wants to go to Juilliard. He's a talented musician. And Chiamaka wants to go to Duke? I think it's Duke. But anyway, she wants to go to an Ivy League school and she's like on her way to doing the thing, you know? They're seniors in high school, and at the beginning of the school year, the whole school starts to get these anonymous text messages from a person named Aces. And Aces seems to be trying to dig up dirt on Chiamaka and Devon and is trying to spread it around the school. And the two of them don't really like each other, but they have to team up to figure out who Aces is and stop them before Aces destroys their futures. This book I thought was a really good thriller. Like, it was a really, really good thriller. I think it's the first YA thriller I've ever read, but it was great. I thought the story was really compelling. I thought the ending was really realistic. It had me on the edge of my seat the entire time. The only kind of complaint that I have about this book is that it seemed like it was a little bit too obviously based on Gossip Girl for my taste. However, I think it worked and I did really enjoy it. And I ended up giving this one 4 stars. The next book I read in May was The Atlas 6 by Olive E. Blake. This is a book that I bought relatively recently and I didn't plan to read it this month, but one of my friends in real life was in the middle of this book and really wanted someone to talk about it with, so I ended up picking it up. This is an adult fantasy book. This book follows a cast of 6 characters who are all recruited by the Alexandrian Society to go to the Library of Alexandria and study for a year there. This is definitely dark academia. And at the end of the year, one of them will be eliminated and the rest will go on to kind of success and access to the Alexandrian Library and access to this knowledge that most people never will get their hands on. All of these characters have specific magical kind of specialties, and most of the book is spent kind of getting to know each of them and how they interact with one another. I would say that this book was pretty slow. This is the book that I was talking about earlier when I said there was a book that took me way too long to read. This was it. This is like a 370 page book, and I think it took me 2 weeks to read it. It just was very slow. The story felt like it was kind of all over the place for me, and while there was one character that I really enjoyed, Libby, if you're curious, the rest of them I found to be very pretentious and very unrelatable. And while I don't have to like all of the characters, they all kind of almost blended into each other because they were all very similar, at least to me they were. But I did really like Libby. Another thing about this book is that it's really full of kind of abstract philosophical jargon. Most of it I didn't understand, and I think the average reader probably wouldn't understand. Maybe I'm just underestimating other people, but I didn't understand any of the like academic knowledge seeking stuff that was happening in this book, which I think made it hard to read. This book like didn't really pick up and didn't really, in my opinion, have a plot until about the last 60 pages. And while I really enjoyed the last 60 pages, I couldn't give it more than a 3-star, which is what I ended up settling on for this one. I do not think I will be picking up the next book unless it has like glowing reviews from people who didn't love this one, but I am really glad I tried it. And yeah, I was pretty disappointed by this one, but it is what it is. The last book I read in May, last but not least, was Behind Closed Doors by B.A. Paris. This is an adult thriller, and I thought this was great. So this book follows a woman named Grace, and Grace, a year prior to when this book starts, married a man named Jack, and they're kind of regarded in their social circle as the perfect couple. And they like to have these very elaborate dinner parties, and they always go off without a hitch. And everyone's just like, wow, this couple, they're perfect in every way. However, you start to realize pretty quickly that something is kind of amiss. Grace seems very, very kind of preoccupied by trying to be perfect in every way for Jack. She seems almost kind of scared of what he'll do if she isn't perfect. And you start to realize that things are just kind of weird. So this book alternates between the present day and the past. And the past is kind of Grace and Jack meeting and kind of the development of their relationship. And then the present is present day 1 year after their marriage. And you're just kind of like piecing together what is going on, and it's wild. It was a wild ride. I absolutely loved this. I thought it was a really, really, really good thriller. I definitely would recommend it. I can't really say more because it's a thriller. I don't want to like spoil it, but this was really, really good. Gave it 4 stars. The only reason I didn't give it 5 stars is because I don't think I would revisit this book. However, I definitely would recommend it if you're into thrillers. Definitely pick this one up. It was great. So that is it for the 10 books I read in May. I'm going to quickly just run you through the 2 books that I'm currently in the middle of. Not even in the middle of, I just started both of them, so I don't really have thoughts together for them. The first one is Skyward by Brandon Sanderson. I actually forgot about the Buzzwordathon, which I've been doing every single month until like the last couple days of this month, and the prompt was something with like a direction in the name, like north, south, east, west, left, right, whatever. And the only thing I had that really worked was Skyward. So that is the one that I started, but it is a longer book and I don't think I will finish it in May. So I will definitely talk about that one in June, and I am enjoying it. And then the other book that I just started is Cultish by Amanda Montell. And this is a nonfiction book about cults. And I've been really excited to read this book, so I'm so happy I finally picked it up, and so far, so good. So you will hear about both of those books in my June wrap up, but I did want to just keep you apprised of what I'm reading. I hope you enjoyed this video. Again, if you're new, I'd really appreciate if you liked this video and subscribed to my channel. If you're still here, thank you so much for being here. I always really appreciate it, and I will see you next time.